Good afternoon. Monica Miller here, the legal director and senior counsel at the American Humanist Association, and this is Legal Tuesdays, where I answer your questions about separation of church and state. You'll see I have some plant babies surrounding me. I noticed my last Legal Tuesday video, I didn't have any plants, and it's funny because I've got plants like everywhere in my house, and I thought it was just so odd that the one place that anyone else, people actually see from the outside world did not have any life to it. So I just added some for some positivity in the world, because we just all need it constantly these days. The question I'll take today is from someone who asked that everything you were talking about has gone on in Utah all my life. The state is rich and ripe for the picking. How come I never hear about cases being brought here? I'll say there's a couple things going on. One, there are cases that have been brought in Utah, certainly not as many as like in the main Bible Belt area. The 11th Circuit, the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals area is where we see the most flagrant violations and the most frequent violations. But we've actually had cases, and I've sent plenty of letters out in the Utah area in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. We actually had a case that we won in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals against Douglas County School District in Colorado. But that ruling, which is a really good public school case ruling that says that you can't fundraise for religious charities, even if they're doing sort of secular activities. In our case, it was Operation Christmas Child. So if you live in Utah and your school is doing a fundraiser for any sort of religious organization like Operation Christmas Child, then that would be unlawful and directly at odds with the precedent that we created. But that being said, and my late constitutional law professor, Cheryl Hanna, was also someone who championed religious freedom. And I actually sought her out as my mentor when I created the Secular Law Student Association law group at my law school, Vermont Law School, back in the day, forever ago. And she just thought, she was so curious and interested about Mormon polygamy and how it was sort of hypocritical that mainstream Christianity kind of separated them off, and that they were sort of persecuted, and that the laws against polygamy, she felt, were sort of like, purely targeting moral behavior, and were kind of prejudice against Mormons. So she actually brought someone to our campus that had represented the Brown family, the Browns from, I forget what channel it's on, but it's a series about Utah, a polygamous family, and they flee Utah and end up settling, I do watch this show. I haven't watched it in a long time. Sister Wives. And she was in, I think she wrote a law review article about Big Love. That would be interesting to read if you're interested. But all of this is to say that my sort of hypothesis here is that because Mormons and the Latter-day Saints in more contemporary times have experienced religious persecution, and this feeling that they're more or less a minority. There's certain Christian sects that don't even consider them Christian. I don't really know where they stand on that, but I think that they value church-state separation more than other Christian sects. There's no reason other Christians shouldn't care just as much, if not more, about church-state separation, because their religious freedom is just as much at stake when the government takes it and uses that religion in its own ways, exploits it and decides, you know what, tomorrow the Latin cross is no longer going to mean just Christians. We're going to let the Satanists and the Humanists and the Buddhists all rebrand the cross and use it for their, war dead too. Because that's basically what the Supreme Court invited the public to do with the Latin cross in our Bladensburg cross case. So the losers really are Christians. And I think that the Mormons, at least, I'm totally overgeneralizing and making a lot of assumptions, but my take is that there's a little bit more understanding that to have religious freedom, you have to sort of like at least sort of comply. But then again, there's also the fact that it could be so normalized that the violations are so normalized that like no one even knows to complain. If there's graduation prayers, I don't know. There was a 10th Circuit Court of Appeals case that did stem out of Utah that was quite favorable involving a Latin cross. The Utah Highway Patrol had these highway markers, but they sort of became permanent crosses. They were up for like 10 years, and they had the beehive symbol on them that was associated with the state. And so passersby, especially on like a 60-mile-an-hour freeway, only saw a cross and the Utah state symbol and maybe some markings that would indicate it was a memorial, but it wasn't self-evident at that speed. And that was all noted in the opinion. Also noted in the opinion was the fact, and this was an argument made by the government to say why the crosses should be allowed, was that the Mormons don't believe in the cross. They haven't embraced the Latin cross as their religious symbol. And so the government couldn't possibly be seen as endorsing Mormonism. And the court just said, no, it doesn't have to be the religion of the dominant, population. It's like the government can't endorse Christianity, period. But as far as, I found it interesting to learn a little bit more about Mormonism in reading that case a while back. And then, we've definitely sent letters. I've sent a ton of letters, out in Utah and beyond. One of which was a dress code that had been applied to a very young 6-year-old who had like a shoulder that was exposed. It was something ridiculous. And so I looked at the dress code, and it very much coincided with like the Mormon church. And while you can have laws that coincide with religious belief, you cannot adopt them as your code when they are just religiously based. And so I sent a letter, and it was successful. They ended up apologizing to the kid and I think clarifying their policy. So this was a long one, a lot of pontificating, and I invite you in the comments to offer your thoughts on why, whether you agree that there is sort of not as many cases in Utah, but that there are a lot of violations that aren't being addressed, or whether you haven't seen as many violations, or if you agree that there are less than in the Bible Belt, if you have thoughts on why Mormons might be more compliant with the First Amendment than just as devout other Christian sect counterparts. All right, talk to you on the next segment.